In the 12th century, noblewomen were rarely independent political actors. They were treated as strategic assets, expected to bear heirs and then surrender their ancestral lands to the control of their husbands. The sheer scale of that control was visible on any map of the era. Eleanor was the sole heir to the Duchy of Aquitaine, a region covering the richest quarter of modern-day France. This inheritance made her the ultimate objective for the French crown. To absorb her lands, King Louis VI moved immediately, marrying Eleanor to his son and heir, the future Louis VII. But Eleanor proved difficult to contain. She acted as a military advisor on the Second Crusade, clashing with the submissive expectations of the Parisian court. When the marriage failed to produce a male heir after 15 years, both sides agreed to an annulment, leaving Eleanor in sole possession of her lands once more. At this stage of her life, her influence was tied entirely to her borders. Because she held the keys to Aquitaine, her choice of a second husband would determine the balance of power across the continent. Just 8 weeks after her annulment, Eleanor executed a move that caught the French crown completely off guard. She bypassed every local suitor and voluntarily married the future King Henry II of England. The geography of the marriage was devastating for France. Overnight, Henry's territorial holdings more than doubled, and the wealth of Aquitaine shifted its allegiance from Paris to London. In 1154, Eleanor and Henry were crowned in Westminster Abbey, marking the formal beginning of the Plantagenet dynasty. By navigating her own remarriage, Eleanor turned her inheritance into a weapon, dismantling French security and creating the territorial core of what would become the Angevin Empire. For nearly 20 years, Eleanor secured the dynasty's future, giving birth to 5 sons, and helping to expand the empire's borders from the Scottish border to the Pyrenees. However, King Henry was a relentless micromanager. Despite the success of the empire, he refused to grant Eleanor or their adult children any functional power to govern the lands they had been promised. Eleanor realized that while she held the titles of queen and duchess, she lacked the actual authority to run her own administration. In 1173, she responded with an act violating every medieval code of wifely submission. She organized a massive, coordinated military rebellion against her husband. She engineered a coalition that turned her own sons and her ex-husband, King Louis, into a united front, launching a multinational assault on Henry's authority. This was not a typical family dispute over inheritance. By leading an army against the king, Eleanor was asserting her right to political autonomy through force. The rebellion ultimately failed to overcome Henry's military energy. While attempting to flee to the French court in Paris, Eleanor was captured by Henry's agents and sent back to England in custody. Henry's punishment was clinical. He placed Eleanor under strict house arrest at Winchester, where she would spend the next 15 years in near-total isolation, cut off from her children and the governance of her duchy. Henry chose extreme containment rather than execution. Keeping her locked away for over a decade proved that he considered her political mind far too dangerous to leave at large. The dynamic shifted instantly in 1189. Following Henry's death, his successor, Richard the Lionheart, sent word to England to release his 67-year-old mother from her confinement. Richard's priority was not governing England, but the Third Crusade. He spent his treasury and his time preparing for war in the Middle East, eventually leaving a massive administrative void at home. Eleanor stepped into that void, running the empire as its lead administrator. She transacted state business with her own seal and worked tirelessly to block the treasonous intrigues of her younger son, John. When Richard was taken hostage on his return journey, Eleanor managed the crisis with total command. She levied a massive tax across the empire to raise a 100,000 mark ransom and personally traveled to Germany to negotiate his release. By this stage, Eleanor's role had changed. She was no longer a prize or a rebel. She had become the functional manager of the continent's most complex political machine. After Richard's death in 1199, Eleanor, now in her 80s, continued to secure the crown for her son John. She crossed the Pyrenees to arrange a diplomatic marriage and physically directed the defense of the castle at Mirabeau during a siege to keep John on the throne. Eleanor died in 1204. She was buried at Fontevraud Abbey, alongside the husband she had fought and the son she had saved. Her choice of a memorial was unique. Instead of the standard pious imagery of the time, she was carved reading a book, a permanent symbol of her life as an intellectual and an administrator. The value of her management became clear almost immediately after she left the stage. Under King John's leadership, the vast continental holdings Eleanor had spent 50 years securing began to fracture. The rapid dissolution of the Angevin Empire serves as the final proof of her political value. Without Eleanor's management, the work of half a century dissolved in less than a decade.